Great Smoky Mountains National Park receives more visitors each year than any other national park in the United States. More than Yellowstone. More than the Grand Canyon. 12 million people pass through its entrance gates annually. Most of them arriving by car along Highway 441, stopping at the Sugarlands Visitor Center, picking up a trail map printed on waterproof paper, and walking into the forest with their families. The trails are well marked. The parking lots have bathroom facilities. There are ranger stations at regular intervals. And cell service is available on most of the lower elevation paths. The park's website describes the Smokies as a place for everyone, and by every measurable standard it is. Children hike here. Retired couples celebrate anniversaries on the ridgelines. School groups photograph salamanders in the creek beds and carry the photos home in their backpacks. The Cherokee people lived in these mountains for at least 1,000 years before the first European made contact with this part of the continent. They named every peak, every creek, every gap in the ridgeline. They mapped this terrain with a precision that took generations to develop. And they passed that knowledge forward through an oral tradition, so disciplined that specific warnings survived intact across centuries. One of those warnings concerns this mountain, not the rain, not the general wilderness, this mountain. Specific elevations, specific paths, specific times. The warning was not attached to a story about a monster or a spirit that could be dismissed as folklore. It was a boundary. It was a rule, and the people who issued it did not do so lightly because the Cherokee, as any serious student of their history understands, were not a people who issued rules lightly. 12 million people visit this park every year. The warning is still in place. The Cherokee called these mountains shakinage, a word that translates roughly as place of the blue smoke. The name refers to the natural haze that hangs over the ridgelines, produced by the volatile organic compounds released by the dense tree cover, a chemical process that modern atmospheric scientists have measured and documented, and that the Cherokee observed and named centuries before the relevant science existed to explain it. They were precise people. Their language encoded geographic and botanical knowledge that took outside researchers decades to begin to properly catalog. James Mooney, the ethnographer who spent years among the Cherokee in the late 19th century, wrote that their knowledge of local plant medicine alone exceeded anything his contemporaries had formally documented for that region. He was not writing admiringly. He was writing with something closer to professional discomfort. When the Cherokee issued a territorial prohibition, it was not because a story had frightened them. Stories, in the Cherokee tradition, were explanatory. They described what had already been learned. The prohibition came first. The story came later, if it came at all. The prohibition was the knowledge. The specific warning that concerns this script is attached to the high interior of what is now the national park, the upper elevations, the ridgeline corridors, and in particular the peaks above 5,000 feet. The warning, as recorded by Mooney and corroborated by later Cherokee oral historians, carried a territorial designation. Not a spiritual one, a territorial one. These areas were not for the living. That phrasing requires clarification, because, in the Cherokee understanding of the world, it did not mean what a modern reader might assume. It did not mean that the living would die there, not exactly. It meant that those places operated under a different set of conditions than the inhabited world. The rules that govern behavior, navigation, and survival in the lower elevations did not apply at those heights. A person who went there without understanding that was not being brave. They were being uninformed in a way that had consequences. The warning specified which peaks. It specified which ridgelines. In some recorded versions of the prohibition, it specified which months of the year, and which hours of the day carried the highest risk. That level of specificity does not come from tradition alone. It comes from data. It comes from accumulated observation across generations of people who watched what happened when the boundary was crossed. You should ask yourself seriously what they were observing. Before we reach the fifth and final revelation in this script, the one that concerns a warning that is still being issued today. And not by the people you would expect. Stay with this. What follows is not reconstructed. It is documented, sourced, and in several cases still officially unresolved. The highest point in the Great Smoky Mountains is Clingman's Dome. It rises to 6,643 feet above sea level, making it the third highest peak in the eastern United States. On a clear day, from the observation tower at its summit, your visibility extends to more than 100 miles in every direction. There is a paved trail to the top. There is a parking lot. There is at the trailhead a sign that tells you the walk to the summit takes approximately 45 minutes. The Cherokee name for Clingman's Dome is Kewaunee. It is typically translated as the Mulberry Place. That translation is not wrong, but it is incomplete. In the Cherokee territorial system, place names frequently encoded dual information, a surface descriptor and a functional designation. Kewaunee was understood within Cherokee geographic knowledge, not merely as a place where mulberry trees grew, but as a threshold location. A place that sat at the boundary between the inhabited world and something that was not. The Cherokee did not summit Kewaunee casually. Certain ceremonies required proximity to it. Approach was governed by protocol. An unauthorized presence at its upper elevations, presence without the appropriate preparation and purpose, was considered a serious violation of territorial law. That prohibition was encoded, passed forward, repeated. The National Park Service has maintained public records on ranger-assisted incidents at Clingman's Dome since the park's formal establishment in 1934. Among the patterns that emerge in those records is one that has not been formally explained. Disorientation cases at Clingman's Dome occur at a rate statistically inconsistent with the trail's difficulty, its elevation gain, and its usage numbers. Healthy. Experienced hikers, people who have summited more technically demanding peaks without incident, report losing their sense of direction at the summit in clear weather, not in fog, not in precipitation. In clear weather, with full visibility, with working GPS units in their pockets. The GPS units are part of what makes these cases notable. A compass reads magnetic north regardless of terrain or weather. A GPS unit receives satellite signal and calculates position from orbit. Neither of these instruments should fail on an open summit on a clear day. And yet the incident reports, which are public record and have been reviewed by researchers, include multiple accounts of hikers descending what they believe to be the return trail and arriving, sometimes hours later, at points on the mountain that are not on the return trail. Points that required them to have walked in directions they did not intend to walk. Points, in several cases, that placed them inside the ridgeline corridor the Cherokee prohibition specifically named. One ranger, interviewed informally by a regional outdoors publication in 2017, described responding to a disorientation call from a hiker who had been missing for 6 hours on a trail that, under normal conditions, takes 45 minutes to complete. The hiker was found less than a mile from the summit. He had been walking continuously. He could not account for the distance between where he believed himself to be and where he was found. His GPS log showed a movement pattern the ranger described, in print, as one he had never seen a device produce under normal operating conditions. The ranger did not speculate further. Neither did the report. The Cherokee territorial prohibition on the high interior of the Smokies did not apply only to the peaks. It applied specifically to a series of ridgeline corridors, elevated pathways along the spine of the mountains where the terrain runs roughly northeast to southwest, following the ancient geological fold that created this range more than 300 million years ago. Those ridgelines are now, in significant part, the route of the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park spans approximately 71 miles. It is one of the most heavily trafficked sections of the entire trail. Thousands of thru-hikers and day hikers walk it each year. The park requires a permit for overnight stays along the trail corridor, and those permits are tracked. The park knows, with reasonable accuracy, how many people are on that section of trail on any given night. And yet the Smoky Mountains section of the Appalachian Trail corridor contains one of the highest concentrations of unresolved missing persons cases in the eastern United States. This is not a disputed fact. It has been documented by investigative journalists, by researchers who study patterns in national park disappearances, and by the National Park Service's own incident statistics, which are publicly accessible. The Smokies consistently rank among the top national parks in the country for search and rescue operations, missing persons reports, and cases classified as unresolved, meaning the person was never found, or was found but the circumstances of their disappearance could not be determined. What has not been widely publicized, what requires cross-referencing the missing persons' geographic data with 19th-century ethnographic records, is this. The clustering of those cases is not random across the park's 71 trail miles. It is concentrated, and the concentration falls along specific ridgeline sections that correspond, with a precision that should give any serious researcher pause, to the territorial boundaries encoded in the Cherokee Prohibition. This comparison has been made. The researchers who made it did not publish in mainstream outlets. The data, however, is accessible to anyone willing to obtain the incident coordinates and lay them against the boundary lines that Mooney recorded in his 1900 ethnographic Study Myths of the Cherokee, which is itself a public domain document available through the Library of Congress. The boundary lines and the incident clusters are not approximate matches. They are the same lines. The Cherokee were not the only people who maintained this prohibition. This detail matters. It matters because one tribe maintaining a territorial warning about a specific mountain range can be explained in any number of ways: local tradition, a specific historical incident, a cultural framework particular to that community. But when multiple tribes, operating in separate territories, speaking separate languages, with no documented coordination on this specific point, maintain parallel prohibitions about the same geographic corridor, the explanation becomes more difficult. The Muskogee Nation, historically known as the Creek, maintained their own territorial knowledge about the Appalachian ridgeline system, particularly in the areas that now comprise parts of Georgia and Alabama. Their warnings about the upper elevations of that ridgeline used different language and referenced different cultural frameworks than the Cherokee warnings. But the boundary they described was the same boundary: the Yuchi people, whose territory once extended through parts of what is now Tennessee, maintained oral records that included specific prohibitions about mountain travel above certain elevations in the same corridor. The Yuchi language is a language isolate. It is not related to Cherokee, not related to Muskogee, not related to any other known language family. The Yuchi developed their territorial knowledge entirely independently. Their boundary was the same boundary, the Catawba Nation, whose traditional territory lay to the east and south, also maintained records, recorded in part by 19th-century researchers, and in part preserved through the Catawba's own ongoing oral tradition, that referenced the interior ridgeline corridor as a place of specific prohibition. Not a generalized avoidance, but a specific designated boundary. 4 nations, 4 languages. 1 boundary. James Mooney in his 1891 fieldwork notes, not in his published work, but in the handwritten notes that are archived at the Smithsonian Institution, recorded a conversation with a Cherokee elder whose name does not appear in the notes, referred to only by a kinship designation. The elder, speaking about the Upper Mountain Territory, said, and Mooney recorded this in direct quotation, that the mountains remember who does not belong. Mooney did not follow up on this statement. He wrote it down and moved to his next question. In the margin beside the quotation he wrote a single word, curious. He did not explain what he found curious about it. He did not elaborate in any subsequent writing. The note sits in the archive with no further annotation. What the elder meant by remember, whether that was a translation artifact, a metaphor, or something else, was never explored. It remains in the record unexplained. And the people who would have been qualified to explain it are no longer here to do so. In June of 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin disappeared in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He was with his family on Spence Field, a high meadow along the Appalachian Trail corridor, at an elevation of approximately 4,800 feet. He had been playing a game with his brothers, hiding behind a bush to startle his father. He stepped behind the bush and was not seen again. The search that followed was one of the largest in the park's history at that time. Hundreds of volunteers, professional trackers, military personnel. The FBI became involved. The search continued for days, then weeks, then months. Dennis Martin was never found. Spence Field sits within the ridgeline corridor that the Cherokee Prohibition specifically named. This single case, taken alone, is a tragedy without an explanation, but it does not exist alone. The cases that followed it, documented over the subsequent 5 decades, form a pattern that researchers who study national park disappearances have described carefully and with appropriate qualification as unlike anything they have observed in comparable wilderness environments. In 2008, an experienced hiker named Thelma Pauline Melton walked ahead of her hiking companions on a trail in the Smokies and vanished. Her companions were close behind her. They rounded a bend and she was gone. The search that followed found no trace of her. Her disappearance point falls inside the Cherokee boundary. In 2019, a mountaineer, an individual with professional wilderness training, emergency signaling equipment, and a functioning satellite communicator, entered the high interior of the park on a solo trip and activated his emergency beacon after becoming disoriented. He was found 4 miles from his last confirmed position. He could not account for 2 days of time. His satellite communicator log showed no movement during the period he could not remember, and then a continuous movement pattern that did not match any trail in the park. The National Park Service report on his recovery is a public document. It does not explain the communicator log. It classifies the case as resolved because the individual was recovered alive. His entry point, his last confirmed position, and his recovery point all fall within the Cherokee-designated corridor. The Park Service does not draw this conclusion in any public document. The Cherokee boundary and the incident data have not been formally compared in any official report. The comparison requires a researcher to do what the institutions have not done, to lay one set of records against another and read what the overlap says. The overlap says something. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is a federally recognized tribal nation. Their reservation, the Qualla Boundary, sits directly adjacent to the western entrance of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Their territory and the park's territory share a border that has been a subject of legal and cultural negotiation for decades. The Eastern Band has never formally endorsed unrestricted public access to certain sections of the park's interior. This position is not widely publicized and does not appear in the park's visitor materials. It is, however, part of the Eastern Band's ongoing formal relationship with the National Park Service, a relationship that includes consultation protocols required under federal law when federal actions affect tribal cultural and historical interests. In 2021, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians Tribal Council issued a statement regarding the park's interior lands. The statement referenced the ongoing ceremonial and cultural status of specific areas within the park boundaries. It did not name coordinates, it did not draw a map, but it designated certain areas as living cultural sites, meaning sites that are not historical, not archaeological, not past tense. Sites that are in the present tense active. The statement was reported in regional tribal media. It did not receive coverage in national or outdoor recreation press. The National Park Service maintains internal guidance documents for search and rescue operations within the Smokies. These documents are not generally available to the public, but have been partially obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests filed by researchers in the years following several high-profile disappearances. Among the guidance those documents contain is a designation of specific zones within the park where, as the language in one document states, standard search pattern protocols have historically produced results inconsistent with expected outcomes. That language is bureaucratic. What it describes is this: in certain areas of the park, searches conducted using the methods that reliably locate missing persons in other wilderness environments do not work the same way. Those zones, the zones where standard search patterns fail, fall within a quarter-mile of the boundary line, the Cherokee prohibition encoded. A quarter-mile is not an approximation. In wilderness search and rescue, a quarter-mile is operational precision. It means the zones are the same zone. The Park Service's internal failure zones and the Cherokee Forbidden Territory are, within the margin of practical field operation, identical. The Park Service document does not reference the Cherokee boundary. It does not reference tribal warnings or oral tradition. It describes the phenomenon in operational terms here. Our methods fail and moves forward with contingency protocols. The Cherokee describe the same phenomenon in territorial terms here. The ordinary rules do not apply and encoded it as a prohibition. Both documents are describing the same place. One of them is more than 1,000 years old. Highway 441 still runs through the heart of the park. The same road that carries 12 million visitors through the entrance gates each year. The Sugarlands Visitor Center is still open. The trail maps are still printed on waterproof paper. The parking lots at Clingman's Dome still fill with minivans on summer weekends. And families still walk the paved path to the observation tower. And the view from the top is still, on clear days, more than 100 miles in every direction. None of that has changed. The trail map you pick up at the visitor center shows the trail system. It shows the parking areas, the ranger station, the backcountry campsites, the permit zones. It shows you where the trails go and approximately how long it will take you to walk them. It does not show you the other boundary. It has never shown you the other boundary. That boundary, the one the Cherokee encoded and passed forward across 1,000 years, the one the Muskogee and the Yuchi and the Catawba each independently confirmed, the one that an elder described to James Mooney in 1891 as a place the mountains remember, the one that a tribal council formally referenced as living and active in 2021, the one whose shape appears in a federal agency's internal failure zone documentation, That boundary is not on your map. But it is there. It has always been there. The Cherokee did not draw that boundary to protect the mountain. They drew it to protect the people who didn't yet know what the mountain was. They issued the warning with the specificity that precise knowledge requires. Not this range, not this wilderness, this peak, this ridgeline, this corridor. These elevations, these hours, they were not being poetic, they were being accurate. The warning predates the United States by centuries. It predates the state of Tennessee. It predates the act of Congress that created the national park, the paved road through its center, the visitor center. The trail maps printed on waterproof paper. It has outlasted all of those things so far. And it has never been lifted. The Cherokee did not stop warning people. People stopped listening.